you mentioned the motions and the plays and the fact that Tony's wide open and Sky Moore is wide open and Juju Smith was running a similar route that he got held on at the end of the game. What did you see that Reid and Bieniemy and everyone on offense was able to dial up in the second half to have a different effect, Chris?
Well, they continue to run the ball. I mean, they stretched edges. They stressed the front with that. I mean, like, the entire game, I thought they deserve a lot of credit, for getting the ball out. I mean, like, anytime you see a great rusher like that, and Andrew Wiley deserves a lot of credit. I thought that was a mismatch. He proved otherwise. I mean, he hung in there. He did a great job at the top of the rush in trying to push Reddick by. He kind of turned a lot of these pass sets into run blocks at the top of the rush and just tried to carve him out of there. I think this was the quickest they had gotten the ball out in a while. They had a ton of play. Over 56% of their pass plays were under 2.5 seconds. So that shot clock was quick for the rushers, and when it wasn't, they maxed up. They did play action. They chipped Son Reddick a ton. And then also the surface. I mean, like, a lot of people are complaining about the call affecting the game. I think the surface affected the way the game played out. I'm not saying it would have necessarily benefited the Eagles, but, these rushers kind of have to change the way they rush a little bit. People were slipping early in the game. I mean, Willie Gay is trying to pick up Devontae Smith on a crosser earlier. He sticks his foot in the ground, and he's slipping, and you can kind of tell the rushers are slipping. Kelsey's slipping, trying to celebrate a touchdown. I thought they did a really nice job in the screen game as well. Like little things like Creed Humphrey blocking up Jordan Davis on the decisive scramble of the game. Jordan's the balance-up guy, and he's given up 100 pounds to Jordan Davis, but he's able to stay on him, and Mahomes is able to, squeak out and run into the red zone there and effectively ice the game. So the front deserves a lot of credit, but what they do is, they game plan, and they go back to week 4, and, I think it was Kadarius Toney's first touchdown as a Chiefer. There was a play when no, it wasn't. No, actually, so they ran jet sweep with Kadarius Toney on his first touchdown. So that helped set it up. But then also week 4, I think they had pointed to a play when the Eagles played the Jaguars, and Jamal Agnew had run a similar play with a different result, and they saw the way that they were kind of like shifting their secondary responsibilities. I think it's called a banjo. I used to hear guys scream it all the time in the red zone and places like that behind me. But basically, when these guys go in motion, as you saw with Darius Slay, he's going to replace the safety, and the safety is going to run to out-leverage the guy who's in motion in case the jet sweep or, he's got to pick him up in coverage. Well, Slay kind of reset that play, and obviously the motion comes right back out. And it's a touchdown. And the unforgivable part is it happens again the very next possession after the Toney return, which was set up by bad special teams play, low line drive kick, and a great return. And ironically, if you're a Giant fan, maybe it's not such a bad draft pick after all because the guy beat the Eagles, right? It was a lot of, hey, we're going to do what we do. We've changed the offensive line a great deal in a calendar year over the course of a year or two. You go into this game and you're like, you'd hate to see it be a repeat of the Bucs game in the Super Bowl, and it wasn't, and then some, because they're able to run these gap scheme runs. They've got Pacheco, and I thought, look at the two guys that scored the touchdowns at the end of the game. They weren't on this roster a calendar year ago, yeah. Toney, Sky Moore. So, Sky Moore had a big punt return in the AFC Championship. You also had Pacheco playing a huge role. So, Tyreek Hill leaves. Juju has a big drive where he's got 3-4 catches. He ended up with 6 or 7 catches. MVS had a huge AFC Championship. They had a lot of guys step up that haven't been a part of this ride for them. And here they are again as world champions and Patrick Mahomes in 5 years. I mean, now I got to put him on, he's unquestionably a top 5 quarterback of all time when you look at the resume and what you see on tape. I mean, he's just, to me, he's in that conversation already with a long time to go.
Well, before we get a little bit more into Mahomes, I do want to spend a couple minutes with you, Chris Long, about what Steve Spagnuolo did. It just seemed that there was a shift defensively for the Chiefs in the second half as well. What did you see he was doing that that was a huge 3-and-out for the Eagles after the Toney touchdown, and that led to the Toney return and the Sky Moore touchdown you just referred to. They also bowed up in the red zone after they scored a touchdown to start the second half and forced the Eagles to just go for 3. What did you see out of Spagnuolo?
Well, he was selective about when he brought pressure, and I thought that was smart. And I thought short of the Snead play where he kind of dropped Devontae Smith in coverage, and another thing that the Eagles did a good job of on the positive side, they did a good job with Chris Jones, and that was a play where I talked about after the AFC Championship, when Chris Jones is not on the field, you got to take shots, and they did. But yeah, the red zone was a huge deal, right? Like on both sides of the ball, because the Eagles, who are one of the better red zone teams in the league, Chiefs are going to go 100% if not for that game-winning field goal. So on the other side of things, you mentioned that 3-and-out. You mentioned the low red zone, or the red zone stop that they had. This was the kind of game where if you're sitting there on defense, I want to credit Spags and the Chiefs defense, but it's really about, the bar for success is pretty low. After you saw these couple possessions of the game, all you have to do is get a stop, right? It kind of came down to whoever's going to get a stop at some point, because the math just wouldn't add up. And, for the Eagles, I think the difference was, on our 2018 Super Bowl against the Patriots, we were able to make one big defensive play. It's a very similar game, when you look at it. I think we won that one 41-33 or something. This team gave up 35 points. We didn't play great in that Super Bowl defensively, but the one thing that we were able to do was get one big play. And I thought what was different in this game was, what was similar was Tom Brady got the ball out pretty quick in our Super Bowl, as you could see in those numbers. Patrick Mahomes got the ball out as well, and they leaned heavily on 7-man protection when they had to, and they chipped out. So, kind of an around-the-world thing here to answer your question, but I think Spags deserves credit. I think the bar for success was pretty low, because all you had to do was get a stop or 2 in that second half, and they did that. And they created one big turnover. They didn't create it necessarily because Jalen just dropped the ball, but they had Nick Bolton up in a mug look, and they go to run that QB draw, and he's right there to disrupt Jalen Hurts and make him think. And he drops the ball, and it's 7. And for a guy who played such a perfect game, that's the one big mistake. And for the Eagles, they weren't able to get those turnovers.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.